Okay, so good evening and welcome. A very warm Caribbean welcome to you, all of you attending from, I understand, more than 40 countries around the world, and some 100 or 1,100 of you who've joined in. So we welcome you. And I want to particularly mention some new countries who are attending for the very first time. And these include countries as far away as Tonga, Japan, Austria, Lebanon, Ireland, France, and Italy. So we want to welcome you to our discussions. I'm your host, Calvin Wilson, for this Caribbean Conference on Corruption, Compliance, and Cybercrime 2022. We have a very important roundtable discussion with directors of 5 financial intelligence units in the Caribbean. I think we have a very good discussion for you, lots of information to share at this roundtable on AML CFT compliance and the impact that compliance will have on the future development of the Caribbean. This topic is very particularly sensitive at this time for the Caribbean, because there are several challenges that we are facing. But I think the challenges offer pregnant opportunities for fundamental change. And at the heart of that, change would be the role of the FIUs in the region. So our guests are, as I said, 5 directors from financial intelligence units from the Cayman Islands. We have Berdie. From Jamaica, we have Berdie Dixon-Daley. From Barbados, we have Kirk Tate. Trinidad and Tobago, Nigel Stoddard, and certainly not least, Matthew Langevin from Guyana, okay? So we'll focus the discussion on 5 areas, and I just want to read them for you, because each of the directors will have a role to play in addressing these 5 issues. The first is the critical work and role of the FIUs in the evolution of AML CFT compliance in the Caribbean. That will be taken by Nigel Stoddard from Trinidad and Tobago. RJ Berdie from Cayman Islands will look at how FIUs work in the various countries in the region, and how do we identify and manage risks at the national level. Berdie Dixon-Daley, the only female on the panel, will do overcoming compliance challenges in the regional AML CFT framework. And Matthew Langevin from Guyana is going to talk about current trends and other current topics of interest to which all stakeholders in the Caribbean, and I dare say all around the world, should be made aware of. And finally, Kirk Tate from Barbados. He'll do the future of compliance in the Caribbean, how that can be shaped by the leadership role and the work of the FIU. So welcome all of you, panelists, and welcome again to you listening in from around the world. So in terms of housekeeping, we'll have 5 minutes for each director to advance their opening remarks. And then we'll have free-flowing discussions for about 25 minutes or so. Then we'll take questions from the audience for approximately 10 minutes. And then we'll sum up as to what could be potential takeaways for the future. So without further ado, I'll give the floor to Nigel Stoddard, Director of the FIU in Trinidad and Tobago. Nigel, welcome. And the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Calvin, for the wonderful introduction. And good morning, good evening, good night to everyone viewing the channel. So let's begin by just giving a brief background in terms of what an FIU is to get some clarification. The Egmont Group of FIUs is a global organization with approximately 167 FIUs currently. And in the group, there are several regional groups. There are 8 regional groups. In the region here, in Caribbean, we have 25 member CFATF jurisdictions. And out of those, we have 25 FIUs within the region. 4 are in the process of becoming members of Egmont as well. And the Egmont Group basically allows FIUs throughout the world to exchange information and expertise in a secure fashion. to share information relative to both national and internationally, money laundering, financing of terrorism, proliferation financing, as well as other serious crimes. And those are related to international standards. And speaking of international standards, the Financial Action Task Force has international standards, which I would specifically focus on in terms of recommendation 1, 2, recommendation 29, 30, recommendation 40, and IO 6. IO 6 is immediate outcomes 6. And those areas are just some of the areas that FIUs play a specific role in when it comes to the FATA 40 recommendations. Recommendation 1 deals with the national risk assessment, and my colleague RJ would be speaking on that, so I wouldn't go into the recommendation itself, but just to let you know that that deals with the risk assessment of uh, your jurisdiction, and FIUs play a role in that. Recommendation 2 speaks to national cooperation and coordination, and that is important because the FIU is a central part of the AML, anti-money laundering, and the counter-financing regime in each of the jurisdictions that we operate within. When I say central, uh, basically it's a central point that everything comes and goes through relative to AML and CFT. Recommendation 2 also allows FIUs to be part of the National Anti-Money Laundering Committees, which sets policy and procedures relative to anti-money laundering and counter-financing of terrorism. Recommendation 29, which I mentioned before, speaks to the establishment of an FIU. And again, international standard requires all jurisdictions to have an FIU established within their jurisdiction. Uh, Recommendation 30 speaks to conducting parallel investigation with law enforcement. And as well, the FIU again plays a hand-in-hand role with law enforcement in terms of parallel financial investigation that they are conducting, as well as assisting in asset tracing of illicit funds and proceeds. Recommendation 40 deals with the international cooperation, and that deals with requests either being asked by an FIU or spontaneously an FIU providing requests to a foreign FIU or an international organization in their investigation of money laundering, financing, or any other specified offense, human trafficking, etc. That goes to say, and that leads me to IO6, immediate outcome 6. And immediate outcome 6 allows for the use of the financial intelligence. And that is where the FIU provide intelligence to the competent authorities for not only investigations, but as well for supervision, AML supervision as well. Speaking of international standards, what is critical to know, and we would have a lot of compliance officers on the call as well, that the critical role that is played by those compliance officers for an FIU to operate, we need to have suspicious transaction reports coming into the FIUs as well as other type of reports. These suspicious transaction reports is important for the start of any financial intelligence or investigation.
So Nigel,
Pause.
I'm
Yes.
going to be a very
Gotcha.
hard taskmaster today. And I have to stop you there. But before, quickly, I wanted to ask you, in 2003 or thereabouts, the FIU, the CFATF formed the FIU Heads Forum. And the jurisdiction where that started was in Antigua and Barbuda. You mentioned that there were 4 countries, and the role of that forum was really to encourage FIUs in the region to join Egmont. And you said that there were 4 countries in the region who may not have been members of Egmont, who are still not members of Egmont at that time. Can you tell us a bit about that and what process is being undertaken to get those countries to join Egmont?
Right. Those 4 countries, the process is application, but first the countries need to have sponsors, 2 sponsors, for their membership to the Egmont Working Group, the Egmont. Having done that, then there is a membership criteria document that needs to be filled out. And further to that, there's an on-site of the application FIU that is seeking application into Egmont. And after that, it goes back to the Egmont group for consideration and subsequently approval, as the case may be. The 4 countries that I mentioned actually are in the process. Some are a bit ahead of others due to legislation may need to be amended, as the case may be, and those process applications are proceeding as we speak even right now.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that and for framing the discussions that we're about to have in terms of the role of the FIUs. So RJ Berry from the Cayman Islands, I'm going to ask you to talk a bit about how the FIUs work in various countries to identify and manage risks at the national level. The floor is yours, RJ Berry from the Cayman Islands.
Thank you, Calvin. I first want to thank the Caribbean Development Bank for the opportunity to be part of this esteemed panel and to thank all the participants for joining us virtually today. Just to build on a few things Nigel said, I want to really make 5 high-level points on how FIUs help identify, and I'm going to use mitigate rather than manage risks at the national level. Nigel already touched on it. First and foremost, FIUs are either a member or part of the national group that is established to combat ML, TF, and PF. So essentially, an FIU has a seat at the table and is able to contribute and be part of those discussions. FIUs then also have the opportunity to contribute to national strategies, the AML, CFT, CFP national strategies and work plans that are typically developed by jurisdictions. Secondly, FIUs play a critical role in the national risk assessments that jurisdictions do, or if they don't do a formal NRA, whatever other process they do to assess the threats and vulnerabilities that they face to ML, TF, and now PF. So I think one of the key roles we play is we are a good knowledge base. You find that FIUs participate in the NRA process. Typically, a jurisdiction will form various working groups to look at specific risks, whether they're sectoral. There's usually a national threat and national vulnerability group. So you find that FIU staff sit on those groups and contribute to developing the national risk assessment. FIUs are also a source of key statistics. One of the things FIUs do very well, other agencies do it as well, but we keep very good statistics. We kind of try to categorize everything that comes to us through suspicious activity reporting or from requests for information from overseas FIUs. So we can sort of give a good flavor to the types of things we're seeing, because again, we're receiving suspicious activities. That a lot of these things are not going to law enforcement or other agencies, so we can create good statistics on what's being filed with us. Third key area, stakeholder outreach, and I think this will be a theme that my colleagues will talk about as well, particularly with regard to identifying and mitigating risks. One of the key things you need to do when you do your national risk assessment is convey those findings to the private sector and any other public sector bodies that could be involved in the fight against ML, TF, and PF. What you're finding is there's non-traditional public sector agencies that are now playing a role in combating ML, TF, and PF. FIUs are constantly communicating with reporting entities, doing outreach to them, helping them to identify red flags, and also giving them feedback on the quality of the SARs they're filing. Ultimately, higher quality SARs tend to improve the likelihood of investigations being opened and taking place. Fourth, FIUs are tasked under the FATF methodology to conduct strategic analysis, and that helps to identify ML, TF, and PF trends and patterns. So, for example, in Cayman, we did a very in-depth look into money laundering of proceeds of corruption. And what we did is in addition to the operational analysis we do on cases, we did a thorough examination and through research papers and other papers that are published, we looked at some of the key ways that corruption takes place. and we essentially did a deeper dive into how the jurisdiction is impacted or used to facilitate these crimes, and then we share those findings with law enforcement and other supervisors and competent authorities, and where appropriate, share high-level findings with private sector. Lastly, international corruption. Nigel already mentioned this. International corruption is a key thing that FIUs are assessed on, but it's also a key source of intelligence. The requests we receive from overseas FIUs give us a sense of what law enforcement in their jurisdictions are investigating and what the potential nexus to your jurisdiction is. And in addition, going the other way, law enforcement will reach out to an FIU to go to their to go to an overseas FIU to get information for intelligence purposes. So I'll stop there. Those are my big five, and I think I've kept my 5 minutes.
Yes, I think you did.
Back to you, Calvin.
Yeah, thank you very much, RJ. But for the last point, you said international corruption. I think maybe you meant international cooperation. Is that correct?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, international cooperation. So.
Okay. Now, I wanted to ask you a question, and maybe you can bear it in mind if you can't answer it right away. But last year, the World Bank had a report on the national risk assessments that are conducted by 8 advanced economies, and they found those NRAs, if you will, as sort of deficient in some ways in terms of like identifying the risks. And they were chosen in terms of the learning that other countries around the world can draw from those the report. And have you read the report, and what do you say in terms of any assistance that it could be given to you, your jurisdiction, and jurisdictions around the region in terms of understanding the process and conducting it successfully?
I have not read the report, Calvin, but having been through 2 national risk assessments, it's incredibly important that jurisdictions be able to demonstrate how they've assessed their risks. And yes, statistics play a key role, and I'm sure as methodologies evolve, but your NRA is incredibly scrutinized by the assessors when they come, and you've got to be able to demonstrate how you ultimately assess the risks, the threats, the vulnerabilities, why you've rated them low, medium, high, medium, low, medium, high, whatever it is, because that should form the basis on how you deploy resources to mitigate those risks. So I'll have to take a look at that document, but obviously you're constantly learning how to do it better, and each evolution you expect to see progress made by your own jurisdiction in how you approach it.
Well, thank you very much for that. I'll send you the report informally. So we now come to Berdie Dixon-Daley from Jamaica. Berdie, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Calvin. Thank you to all the persons who have taken time out to listen to us, to hear our story, and to hear it directly from us. And so my task is to say, how exactly do we convey the role of the FIU and the importance of the FIU in each of our jurisdictions. Of course, it is a process, and so there are some things which are common between all of us and some thoughts. But I'd like to look at the FIU as the center of the AML safety regime, in that we have information in, we have information out, and successfully being able to be able to successfully manage and to comply with the 40 recommendation. It means that a lot of information is necessary. And so to start with, that's the major role of the FIU, in that we can get information, and we have information which is both local, which is international, or we have those mechanisms in which we can get that information. And so we're able to impart to law enforcement, other stakeholders that need information. We are that source, and provide valuable information to those stakeholders. The other area is that FIUs produce typologies. And our typologies are looking at exactly what is happening And we regularly, or maybe regularly, do so by sharing with the public on our website exactly what is happening there, what are we seeing currently that affects them. And it does affect everybody in that our work is focused on the financial system. And once there is problem in the financial system, then means at some point trickles down to everybody else. So our role in terms of providing typology is very, 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 very critical. FIUs, wherever we are part of a working group. We're part of a network. And it is through these networks, such as working groups within the Egmont, the Egmont group, working groups in terms of the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force, and bringing to persons what exactly exists through the different topics that we may choose. We choose topics that are current, we choose topics that are relevant, and we choose topics that we hope will assist in us complying with those 40 recommendations. And so, for instance, at our last CFATF meeting, we chose a topic having to do with virtual assets. Now, that is very current, that is very topical, but it gives us a measurement as to where are we as a region, where are we supposed to be, and where there are gaps, and exactly maybe in which jurisdictions we have those gaps. So that again is part of our information flow and how we affect the public and the role we play. Public education, of course, for instance, this forum is part of public education. It's part of highlighting there are different aspects to what we do, and certainly all 5 of us will be speaking on different issues, even though we are part of a FIU, and it just shows the extent of our involvement in national life.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Berdie. I'm monitoring the time.
Yes.
Now, the issue for you was like overcoming the challenges in the region, in the EML-CFT firmament in the region.
Challenges.
And I know that. And I know that Jamaica.
Come on.
Go ahead.
All right, I have a question from the audience. It says, has the current regional EML-CFT framework changed for the better over the years? So the question for you is also what challenges we have to overcome in the region at the minute, and how have they changed? Have they changed for the better as per the questionnaire over the years? And I know you've been at the FIU for a while, and you've been in the CFATF world and the FATF world for a bit as well.
Yes.
So what changes have you seen, and are the changes for the better?
So I think the challenges we see are persons are more educated. So the wider public is more educated, and they're demanding more information in terms of exactly how do we fit in the global framework, where are we in the global framework. The challenge we have with that is that while we have institutions and we have some persons who are very aware, there is that ultimate political framework which must be set, just like any other legislative body, legislative committee. So that is where I think we're falling short in that the technocrats, so to speak, are aware of what is happening. The public is aware of what is necessary, but I think our legislative framework and our policymakers need to either listen or really need to now form that framework where they can now speak with us. And so we are basically at the same level in terms of achieving that ultimate goal of compliance.
Okay, so good. You said the political directorate,
yes,
and the policymakers, they need to be more involved and more aware as to what's going on in terms of risks for the Caribbean and challenges that are being faced by EML-CFT practitioners. The next person up is Matthew Lanjoin from Jamaica, from Guyana. And Matthew's going to talk about the current trends. Berdie hinted at the trends, RJ hinted at trends as well. So Matthew's going to give us a more detailed brief as to insight into what trends and patterns are being seen in terms of criminal behavior in the Caribbean. Matthew, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Calvin. Let me start off by again joining my colleagues in thanking the CDB and the Dr. for inviting us to be a part of this panel, Dr. Toussaint Boyce. I think this is my second time participating in this program, and I've seen and I've gotten great feedback as to how persons are benefiting from it and how they learn about the work that we do as FIUs and as MLCFT stakeholders. Now, what I want to focus is what we as FIUs are seeing in the region in terms of current threats and current typologies. I think we can look at this from a few different perspectives, and one is pre-COVID and post-COVID. I think the landscape has been affected so much post-COVID that we have to make that separation. First of all, pre-COVID, and I can also speak of it from a Guyana perspective as against a regional perspective and an international perspective, because one of the things we recognize is that while a lot of the countries are experiencing similar types of activities in terms of money laundering, there are some activities that are specific and unique to certain countries. And I think we have to look at it from that perspective. And I think it's also important that we recognize from the outset that a forum like this will not allow us to really address fully all the issues that countries face with respect to money laundering threats and risks. And so I would encourage persons that are part of this conference to really go to the source. There are a lot of information available on FIU websites and at the CFATF level, where we share typologies extensively on what is happening in the region. But specifically with respect to Guyana presently, one of the things that we saw pre-COVID were trends relating to monies flowing through money transfer agencies. And that pointed directly to suspected illegal monies coming from drug trafficking, as well as illegal human smuggling and those types of activities. And that was so because of the way the transactions were being conducted, where several persons were sending money to one person in certain high-risk jurisdictions, for example, or one person may be sending transactions to several persons in various jurisdictions on the same day using multiple money transfer agencies. And so those suspicious type activities were flagged and investigated by the FIU and law enforcement. And it was clear that the funding was coming from and was linked to illegal activities. Now, if we look at what was done in terms of addressing those issues, I think it's important that we recognize that to be effective, we need to collaborate. And one of the things that we did in Guyana was work closely with reporting entities, work closely with law enforcement in helping to make sure that these cases are thoroughly investigated and that the persons are brought to face justice. We also tried as much as we could to see if we can stop the transactions before they are conducted, so that the monies are not allowed to enter the financial system. I want to touch also on post-COVID. And as we went through that whole phase of COVID, we recognized that the typologies and the threats that we experienced changed drastically. And so post-COVID, what we saw was a high prevalence of Ponzi schemes, pyramid schemes. I think most countries in the region would have seen those activities and would have reported and shared best practices on how those can be addressed. And I think we had great success in Guyana. A number of persons were charged. A lot of funds were recovered and redirected to the persons who lost money. And so again, the key to that was one, public awareness, sharing the information with the public, letting the public know what is going on, let them know how they can protect themselves from these types of threats, and also making sure that the entities which are used to conduct these type of activities try to nip it in the bud from at the early stage, from the inception. So we engage with the financial institutions, with the money transfer agencies, and to make sure that they play their part. Another one that was prevalent throughout the region was these, what we refer to as um, romance scams and package delivery scams. I mean, if you look at the suspicious transaction reports that were filed to the FIU in Guyana in 2021, more than 70% of those were linked to suspected romance scams and package delivery scams. And that is where persons meet people online and they engage them, befriend them, develop love interests, and then they make promises to send monies or send gifts to them. And then it evolves into a stage whereby they receive calls and they are told that they can collect the items or collect the funds, but they have to pay a certain amount of money. And once that money is paid, the connection to the individuals are lost, and persons have been known to lose substantial amounts of money through these types of scams. I think importantly, and the success that we would have seen in Guyana again would have been achieved because of the intense collaboration with the reporting entities and with law enforcement, along with public awareness. For example, in one recent case, through the very vigilant efforts of one financial institution, one person was able to save as much as 7,500 US that they had already deposited into an account, only for the person to turn up almost simultaneously to withdraw the money. And the bank was able to hold the funds and immediately took steps to avoid the monies being withdrawn. And so the person who deposited the money was able to retrieve those funds. And so it is very important that we cooperate, we share our experiences, that we work very closely with law enforcement and with the reporting entities to avoid some of the activities that we're seeing now across the region from occurring. Some of the other activities that
Matthew, I'm going to have to stop you in the interest of time, but there are some questions that are pertinent to what you've just discussed. So the questioners are asking whether the collaboration and the cooperation that you've spoken about and the successes you've had in terms of the Ponzi schemes, the money transfer schemes, and also the romance scams, getting successful convictions, redirecting the funds from being illegal to good causes. Does that go towards fighting corruption? And also, have you seen anything in terms of cybercrime? We know of the great global scandal that's happening right now in terms of the cyber, the FTX. And so are you seeing anything like that in the Caribbean in terms of either cybercrime and also corruption?
Thankfully, Guyana has not seen much of those types of cybercrime, but I know in other parts of the region, for example, in Cayman and BVI and in the Bahamas, they would have been seeing those types of activities. So it's not foreign to the region. And I think this was emphasized at our last CFATF conference, that there needs to be an increased level of awareness, because while it may not be in Guyana presently, we're sure that it's not something that is far off, and as we're seeing it affecting many of the countries that are close to us. With respect to corruption, that's another typology that is very prevalent, and it is connected in many instances to public procurement. I think this was mentioned in one of the earlier meetings, but this is something that we know happens. It's very much linked to politically exposed persons. And so again, it is very important that we as FIUs, we as reporting entities, many of them may be listening as part of this conference. It requires extreme vigilance and for us to be proactive in identifying the activities when they occur, reporting it in a timely basis to law enforcement, and making sure that we cooperate and collaborate so that action can be taken.
Okay, so thank you very much, Matthew, for presenting on your area for the discussions, but also answering some of the questions from the viewing audience. And so, Kurt, the time comes, the floor falls to you now with regard to how the future of compliance in the Caribbean can be shaped by the leadership and the work of the FIUs.
Yeah.
You have 5 minutes, Kurt.
Yes.
With some leeway.
Thank you so much, Catherine, for that introduction. And kudos to the CDB and Dr. Toussaint Boyce for his efforts over the last few years, delivering this very important conference to the region. On the question of the future, Calvin, of compliance in the Caribbean and how FIU can shape and provide leadership in the space, I would start by saying that an FIU has the ability at this point, because of several factors, a chance to lead, almost lead and become a model organization in the public sector. I say that because of the converging forces of the immediacy and demand of international standards, plus the political backing that we have often gotten and so on as well, can push FIUs to the forefront of leadership in terms of demonstrating what an effective public service organization might look like. I say it again because I commented to the sector only a few years ago. I got some documentation that spoke to aiming for effectiveness in my organization. Now, the FIU, because of its very role, has that mantle upon it in terms of aiming for effectiveness. I would suggest, therefore, that the leadership component for an FIU may be towards ensuring that we deliver and model what an effective public sector organization might possibly look like. Now, the second point I want to make very quickly, Calvin, has to do with the notion of FIUs as centers of knowledge. Now, we know that from the beginning, from inception, actually, FIUs were looked to by stakeholders for information on AMSPT matters and so on. We provide advice and gave alerts and so on to the media and stakeholders as well along the way. So we naturally developed that tendency to become a center of knowledge. It's important that we understand that role and do what we do better. I say because I think we are poised, I think, to expand our leadership into how we conduct, for example, strategic analysis. Now, that is really a research dimension that we can perhaps leverage to our advantage in terms of anticipating and identifying potential future MLTF risk and making recommendations in the current space as to how to offset the future impact. I think we also have a chance to discuss and further ventilate the notion of international best practice. For example, is there a need for a transition from the sub-region to a best fit practice rather than this international best practice? In other words, does the international best practice one size fits all work for us? And how do we address that going forward? I think as well we have to spend time determining the extent to which we can support an understanding of the international legal economy and the role that FIUs have in that global space. Because as far as I'm concerned, these issues push FIUs into a leadership role that make us more publicly engaged. So we have to now forge alliances between and amongst like-minded FIUs like ourselves and so on, and heads as well. We need to begin to forge alliances in research with academia, okay? Supervisory authorities who are already engaged in AML safety research and relevant other industry bodies and so on. We have to redefine the extent to which we are engaged in secretive matters in terms of how we contribute to the various working groups that are available there. The last component I want to move quickly to has to do with this notion of a public good. The question is there a public good that FIUs deliver? If so, what is that public good? Or is it more linked to working in the public interest, or is it both? Now, I would suggest, Calvin, that this public good is really reputational risk management, right? And arguably, this is something that impacts all countries in the sub-region. And while we can't often quantify it, it remains measurable in the negative fallout that happens when non-compliance occurs in the region, right? We feel it in the decision process and reputational agony that is perpetuated for non-compliance and so on, and the national effort required to get out of the process of review, right? We see it in the de-risking actions of correspondent banks that are integral to the strict mechanism. We see it in the journalistic mediation that eventually accompanies listing as well. So I think there's scope for us as FIUs to lead these processes. But again, it takes courage, it takes leadership, but it can be done by us, I think. Thank you, Kevin.
Okay, so thank you very much, Kirk. And you've raised some very important points. I think one of them, some people may say, well, the one-size-fits-all issue is somewhat addressed in terms of the risk-based approach to how we deal with compliance and effectiveness and so. But you've raised other issues that I think that are very germane to the future. So I think many of them could lead towards takeaways. But we have some questions being asked by the audience, and any of you can jump in. We have approximately 9 minutes again, or 10 minutes again. So are prosecutions for money laundering important? And what were the countries that do not have money laundering cases? I know that's a theme in many of the countries that are currently in the FATF ICRG process, Cayman Islands, Jamaica, Barbados, demonstrating that there are sufficient prosecutions in terms of in keeping with the country's risk profile. So what do you say as to, are these prosecutions important? I'm sure you would say they will, because you're on the ICRG list because of the lack of demonstrating that you're prosecuting these cases. And what about the countries that do not have many laundering cases? Maybe like Haiti, who is on the list, but some people may say, they don't have many cases. So any of you, jump in, take the floor, please.
If I could, Calvin, I'll go first. It is the one remaining action point for the Cayman Islands and the FATF ICRG process, so they're very important. The level of importance could depend in terms of your jurisdiction, but I really can't see that you could argue that they're not important. But for a jurisdiction like the Cayman Islands, that's an international financial center, it is critical. So I think you do have to demonstrate it. Again, this is all tied back to what you identify as both your foreign and domestic risks in your national risk assessment. And people are expecting you to then devote resources to fight those threats, those risks, and demonstrate tangible results. One of the questions is, has the AML CFT standards changed for the better over the years? I think one thing that's categorically true is the standards now require jurisdictions to demonstrate their effectiveness. So you can have the best laws on the books, but you have to be able to demonstrate how you're implementing them. And IO7, which is money laundering investigations and prosecutions, a lot of jurisdictions, not just in the region, but internationally, have not done well on it. So I think it is a key area of focus. And the expectation is that not only will you be looking at domestic criminality, but if there's foreign predicates that impact your jurisdiction and or funds are flowing through your jurisdiction or through a structure in your jurisdiction, the expectation is you will look into those, investigate those, and where applicable prosecute, realizing that the prosecution may also be taking place in a different jurisdiction.
So thank you very much, RJ, and I wish Cayman all the best in terms of your discussions in a place in Paris in February next year. Berdie, I have to come to you because we were talking about the challenges, the AML CFT challenges facing the region. One person said that Jamaica has challenges, and I know you have a particular set of challenges for the FATF ICRG process. And come February next year, it may be a very difficult position that Jamaica may end up at. So what do you say in terms of trying to overcome those challenges in Jamaica specifically, looking to see whether you'll be successful come February next year?
Thank you, Calvin. Some of those challenges are almost outside of our control, in that we have the legal fraternity, which is quite big in terms of outside of the reporting framework just now. And so our challenges in the region are not just something that as a region we control, but there are external forces that does affect the region. And so my earlier call in terms of a political focus is exactly that, in that there are going to be cases where it's outside of our local jurisdiction, and as such, that political commitment, that political will to drive what is happening regionally and as a combined force is looked on. So the challenges are certainly being approached, and hopefully will demonstrate to our external stakeholders the commitment and the willingness to deal with them, but then at the same time recognizing that there are times when there are other external parties that does affect the outcome of those challenges.
Well, Berdie, I wish you all the best, you and your country, in terms of your work next February in Paris, because Jamaica has a very strong voice in the CFATF. Jamaica has a very important role to play in terms of the Caribbean's development. And so if things were to go for the worse next February, then it impacts not only Jamaica's reputation, but also the reputation of the region as a whole. It would impact the issue of de-risking and the ongoing loss of correspondent banking relationships. So I wish you all the best, and maybe someone can make a particular intervention on behalf of Haiti, given all the political difficulties there, that maybe the FATF should reconsider whether Haiti is of sufficient risk to the international financial system to have them on the list, and maybe more support could be given to them. So the question I have for all of you is in terms of the impact, what you do at the FIU, the impact, what you do in terms of ensuring that the Caribbean has a sound reputation for compliance. I mean, yes, there are issues with people countries under risk, but what role do you see in terms of assisting with the development of the Caribbean in the long term? Could address some of the issues very directly, but for the others, what do you see your role as FIU directors in terms of advancing the development of the Caribbean in the future, based upon where you sit in terms of compliance at the FIUs? Any of you jump in?
I would start by saying definitely the role that I see that FIUs would play in terms of strengthening the AML CFT regime in the region is through, again, the information that it provides to not only the law enforcement, but to the policymakers. That information is critical in terms of getting changes within the different policies. The stakeholder meetings with FIUs in terms of addressing those AML CFT issues is another key point. FIUs on its own cannot. We need the cooperation and assistance from not only the competent authorities, but private sector as well, in terms of understanding the risk that we see, that we pose, that we put out there in terms of the different typologies, the different strategic reports. Those would assist not only the jurisdiction, but the region, where all the FIUs are providing those type of reports or information that is reflective of what is happening not only in the jurisdiction, but within the region. So that would definitely assist to strengthen the AML CFT framework throughout the region, as opposed to just the individual jurisdiction. Okay,
so we have 1 more minute. And I think just to sum up maybe the takeaways, this has been a very fascinating conversation. I like the openness of you all in terms of discussing the issues. But I think in terms of takeaways, we can say, and if you disagree, then let me know, the political directorate, more focus need to be paid on them. more focus on the policymakers, more public awareness and public education and awareness raising in terms of AML CFT issues, and also typologies, the trends and patterns happening in the region, and also seeing whether the public good and public interest, those are issues that could be taken on board in the future under the leadership of the FIUs, but also the reputational risk for the region in terms of development, because this has not been an issue that started today or a few years ago. This issue in terms of reputational risk started in the year 2000, when some of the countries that were on the list for the 4th round, they were on the list for the 3rd round. And so the countries who were in the pool in the 3rd round are similarly placed now in the 4th round. So looking to the 5th round, I know the FATF has done a new methodology and amended the FATF recommendations in terms of preparing the countries for the 5th round. And so you all have to work very hard, I presume, in terms of preparing yourselves for those assessments. One part of my advice would be that you start as early as possible. The statistics are very important. That's another point that was raised as part of the things to plan for the future. But I think that what needs to happen, and with your agreement, is that there need to be further discussions by yourselves with all the stakeholders in the AML CFT framework, so that there's more knowledge, education, public education and awareness raising in terms of the threats that the region, that are posing the region, but also the threats that occur in terms of reputational risks and the impact that would have on the continued, as I like to say, the peace, prosperity, and future security of the region. So I want to thank you for your openness, the frankness of your discussions. I hope that we can talk again in the future. I wish you all the best. Those of you who are talking with the people in Paris in February next year, Kirk, Berdie, RJU, colleagues in Haiti, I wish you all the best. Matthew, continue with the good work, and Nigel also as well, continue with the good work. I hope that all goes well for the region, because the future of our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren depend upon what we do now. And so I wish you all the best, and thank the CDB for giving us this platform for the discussions. I hope we've been informative to you, the viewing audience, and we welcome your continued involvement, your comments, your questions. Send them in. We'll try to get them answered for you. So thank you once again, and thank you to Dr. Boyce, his team, and the CDB for offering us this valuable platform to air views that are important to the perception of the region globally. So thank you once again, and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.